Let's stand and pray together. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Take a breath. Focus inward. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we bow to you all. Divine Mother, thank you for this gathering, for the friendship, the fellowship with truth, for your loving presence. Open our hearts and minds that we might feel thee and know thee, and help us to share everything we receive. Oh, peace. Amen. Please be seated. And I just want to welcome everybody and welcome Nayaswami Pranaba. We're having a wonderful weekend with him here. For those who are newer, maybe in Portland, and there are a couple of you, Pranaba and his wife Parvati were spiritual directors here for how many years? 7.5. They were here in Portland, and so we just feel like when he comes, he's just coming home back here. Anyway, it's a joy to have him. And Parvati is with us here in spirit. She's back home at the village, recovering from some back issues that she has, but she would have really loved to be here with us. But Pranaba is going to represent her here this evening. So please just enjoy. Feel free to ask questions and join in the discussion, because this is just a casual gathering of friends. Thank you. Let everybody know that we... Oh, are we going to sing first? Yes. We're singing first. We're singing first. The choir's going to come up and sing one of Swami's songs called Cherish These. And the words are going to be, ta-da! The words are there. And we would love to have you join us after we sing it through so that you'll catch on really quickly here. Thank you. Come on up. Beautiful choir. Great. Yeah. He was supposed to sing. Can I have you come over here? Uh-huh. And Cindy can sing. Cindy, we're singing harmony. I think I'm going to sing harmony. And also one. I'll join you. Okay, great. So that's why I'm just trying to put this together. Okay. Okay. Cherish these.
There
Press the minister button. From the community. She's familiar with Ananda, but she doesn't.
Okay, great. So, say yes to life. It's and there are no. I did get.
There's 4 left.
There's 4 left that Parvati actually signed for all of you, so you can fight among yourselves to get them. But the subtitle of this book is really reflective of how Parvati approached not only the book, but her life. Spiritual adventure and discipleship and the building of Ananda. So that really sums up her energy. And by the way, I did talk to her just a few hours ago, and she did say, make sure that she sends her blessings to all of you. So she very much misses being here. But she's done a number of book launches from the beginning of when the book came out last September. She did one at Ananda Village. We went to Palo Alto to do one. She's, I think, in Sacramento she did one, Ananda Sacramento, and then I think maybe 3 Zoom call book launches too. So she's someone that, outside of my personal relationship to her, is one of these deep souls as a devotee that really is the backbone of Swami and his life of building Ananda. You know, she started taking notes from the very beginning of her experiences with Ananda, with Swami, a lot around Swami. And when we were here as the spiritual directors at Ananda Portland, she decided, this is about the year 2000, I believe, she started to record those notes, plus filling them in with a lot of things that she was remembering as she went through it on cassette tapes. I don't know if you remember what they were like. But it was an easy format for her to do that at that time. And then a number of years ago, probably about 3 years ago, she thought, well, maybe this would be of value to transcribe those talks, look at my notes, she said, and see if something could come together. And at various times in the beginning process, she really, honestly, sincerely, wasn't sure that it had any value for anybody else. That's how it often happens for someone writing. I mean, is this really beyond my impressions for myself? So as she started to write it, she did let a number of people read her first drafts of things. And everyone said, no, this is an important book to have out at this time. And then she acquired the help of Nayaswami Prakash, who I think a lot of us know and some don't know. He basically drives big machinery now as his primary thing in life at Ananda Village. But he's always been an editor. Not a full-fledged editor, more like a proofreading editor in that sense. But his background was that he was an English professor before he came to Ananda. Back in 1974, I think he came, or 1976. So he's been around a long time too, and he helped with some of the stories that Parvati was writing about, because he was there to experience many of those things. So they developed a really good relationship. Now the interesting thing is, Prakash does not have a computer. So the process was much like when you read in Parvati's book about Swami writing the book The Path, which is now called The New Path, is that Asha retyped the manuscript for The Path 20-some times. So with Prakash, the sequence of making this work was, she would, do stuff on the computer, print it out, put it in his mailbox. He would get it. He would read it and do, like Swami used to, edit with the sides and the margins and on top with, in pen and pencil. They'd come back, she'd rewrite it, she'd put it back in his mailbox, and then they'd go through that numerous times for And you can see it's not a big book, but it's substantial when you go through that process with someone like Prakash. But what she said, and it's really sweet what she, and her thanks for people with Prakash. So he supersedes me in the thank yous, which is appropriate. But it says here, where is it? Oh, it's at the very end of the book, that's right. You got to get all these things right when you write books. So first of all, she's thanking Swami Kriyananda, of course. But she says with Prakash, this book would not have been possible without his dedicated editing of the manuscript. I learned a lot about the English language by working with him for the year it took to edit. So it's just very sweet that they connected on this level, especially at this time in his life, because he's more reclusive sometimes anyways in his life at this point. But because I'd have to see what she did with this book all the time, there'd be papers all over the floor, and she would just magically bring it together with Prakash. And when I read the first manuscript, because it took her a year to do this, and it was pretty much every day she worked on it, not all day because she was still taking care of her job, the Janaka Foundation, but and she would let me read things along the way. And this is very interesting when you have a spouse writing something that you've had your own experience of. And there were things that I didn't see it the way that she wrote it at all. And there are just a couple things I actually said to her that wasn't how I remembered it. And just reading it today, some chapters, I thought, that is really not the way I saw that particular incident. But what I thought was, it doesn't matter. This is her understanding, her experience of it. And whether I had another experience really didn't alter what she needed to convey. Because she was conveying the energy and the ideas behind whatever that experience was that I filtered differently from my perspective. And so we got along well in doing the book. And then, I don't know if you noticed, this book has a lot of colored photographs, which is really rare. You look in the number of books that Crystal Clarity's published from Ananda authors, outside of Swami, of course, there aren't many that have photos. And probably Surendra knows this. Photos add a whole other dimension. Now, it's hard to add photos when you're writing philosophically, true? Because what photo, except Jyotisha's painting perhaps, is going to cover that same understanding. So she had the positive side that it was relating to people, and so she had all these photographs. And she had these photographs. There are a few that she didn't have that are in this book. But again, she, I think, intuitively felt throughout the years, the decades, that something was going to be needed in this way. So the photos took about 3 months to get together. And Barbara Bingham, who's the main photographer at Nanda Village, helped tremendously to make that come together. But so the photos themselves, this afternoon or this morning, some of you were looking at the photos, and is that you that's getting married there? But it's fun to see anyone's collection of photos. But Parvati has an abundance of them, so buy the book just for that, and you'll be happy. So, but Parvati really, like many of us, really started her journey before she came to Ananda. She was searching, seeking, something more in her life, and she really felt it wasn't quite it. This wasn't quite it, and she was in a relationship with someone when she first came to Ananda, and it's a fascinating story. When they first came up, she and her partner, it was a tremendously uplifting experience. And then they decided to move here. And then they came up in the fall of 1971. So they'd visited once in the summer and thought, this is wonderful, amazing. And then they move up, and it's snowing in the fall, and it continued to snow. So they abandoned their plan to move to Ananda village. And it was the following summer, 1972, that they finally made it. But when you tune into anyone's story, I mean, all of your stories are similar, and yet very different, is that it's just, where's the target here? What's really happening? And Parvati was so clear about it. It's probably why I felt attracted to her, was that quality the most. She was clear that it was a lifetime to find God. And I thought, to be in the company of someone that's so clear and sincere, and the dedication is there, I thought, I was amazed that we actually ever got into a relationship, because if you know Parvati, she's Parvati. But how we got together is interesting, and it sort of takes us out of some of the things I'll say, but that I was at Ananda village just for 2 years, and then Swami asked me to move to San Francisco. And the reason why was that Parvati was moving back to Ananda village. And she had gone there in, I think, 1980 or 81, when Jyotish and Devi decided that they were going to move back to Ananda village after starting Ananda San Francisco with a big mansion house. And so Parvati went there, and Ram and Dhyana, who were together at that time, Ram is now at the village, Dhyana's over in India, they took over from Jyotish and Devi as a team. And then when Parvati felt that she needed to come back to the village, she actually ended up becoming Swami's personal secretary, which is well described in the book. So I actually went to San Francisco to replace her, so we're crossing currents that way. Then after a while, San Francisco House, she describes it real thoroughly, because it was a 45-room mansion that Ananda leased. And the rent, got higher and higher. By the time I left there, it was like at $5,500 a month. Now, remember, this is 1980s. So, $30,000 a month now in our time. It was a lot, but there were 9.5 bathrooms. That's what saved the day. And the half was just, a vanity thing. And it had 5 floors. And we needed to have roughly about 24 people in it. And you remember the ashram house here, you always want to make sure you've got it full. And it was a major task just to really make sure you had that number of people to make it viable. So when I took over, I was, as I said, with Ram and Dhyana. And then Ram and Dhyana were asked, you can see the movement with Swami a lot. Ram and Dhyana were asked to move to Lake Como in northern Italy to start our Italy center at that time. So that was in 1984. So numerous things happened, but Parvati ended up coming to the Atherton Center, the Palo Alto Center now. It was in Atherton there. And so when she was there and I was directing San Francisco, we started teaching the yoga teacher training program together. We had the 2 centers integrated in some of these class series. So that's how we got to know each other, from that energy of sharing the teachings. And she had been a nun in the previous incarnation of the monastery at Ananda village. She lived at Ayodhya up until she moved to San Francisco in a bread van. A lot of the monastics were living in similar, simple situations. No running water, a little coal stove, in a tin, not very well insulated little, not even a structure, a pretend structure. And the outhouse was some distance away. And she moved to this mansion in San Francisco. And she writes about this, that it was like, oh my God, in her heart, partially when she was asked to move there. And then she said, of course, this is what I'll do. And that's her relationship has always been with Swami. And you feel that saturated throughout her writing, that she said when she connected first with Swami, she knew this is the living experience of what she'd read in the autobiography of a yogi. She felt this was really clearly that. Now, if you think of that time, so she moved in 1972. Swami had written very little. He hadn't written The Path. So there was a real slim understanding of Yogananda's teachings. It was more from bootlegging some of the old SRF magazines to get more of an idea. But there wasn't a lot. Swami had written maybe a few books at the time. Crisis in Modern Thought, which now is called, this is a test. What's it called now?
Out of the Labyrinth.
Out of the Labyrinth. And so, and he had published, in 1969, the first versions of what's now called the Art and Science of Raja Yoga. It was called the 14 Steps to Perfect Joy, and there were lessons sent out every 2 weeks, and there were 14 of them. But there wasn't a lot other than that was available. So Swami himself was really that conveyance of the teachings vibrationally, and the classes he gave, the Sunday service, the chanting that he did. And again, he hadn't written really any chants at that time. In the 70s, he started to write a number of other ones. But so it was really vibrational. And because the numbers weren't as large as they are now at the village, you'll see photos where there's groups with Swami in his dome. Before it became the Crystal Hermitage, it was just that singular little dome. But it would be jammed with people. And I think every Sunday afternoon, Swami had satsangs for the monastics. I think there were 24 or more monks, and I think there were a little bit less of the nuns. And again, the housing was teepees, trailers, and those kind of things. But it was appropriate for that time, because Swami kind of wove his aura around there, because they lived right there at Ayodhya, and Swami was just down the hill. And so the vibration of Master really was so clear and crystal through Swamiji. It was like the vibration was living there, and it helped people to live in that vibration as well. And so, and then Swami started to make some shifts. And at one point, he went to India, and he took Seva and a few other people. Now, Seva was like the control panel for the community, meaning she really was Swami's right-hand person along with Jyotish. Jyotish was the general manager. But Seva, not only that she controlled the financial picture, she had the 7 checkbooks that took care of all the different arms and legs of what Ananda Village was doing. But again, it was more, if you knew Seva, it was like she was that experience, not just doing it. And it was probably the clear example, by the time I came in 1978 to see that Seva was that true Seva person, meaning that her self-service was ringing so true in what she was doing that I actually saw her outside of Swami for a couple of years as my primary conduit, more than Jyotish and Devi, which is interesting. And then Seva became more my friend over the years. But she was going to go to India. And Parvati, was wondering, I wonder who will take care of this stuff? And she went to ask Asha, and Asha smiled and said, we were thinking of you. And Parvati felt, a sense of me. But then she said yes. And she had, I think, 4 months with Seva because the trip was delayed, or 5 months with Seva. They were going to go, I think, in January, and they ended up going in April, so 3 or 4 months more time that Seva could mind meld with Parvati. But it shows great souls like Parvati and Seva, their willingness to jump in where it doesn't make sense from any rational or common sense perspective. But the common sense was there from a divine perspective. And again, it was something that Parvati was willing to jump into, being in charge of the print shop. The print shop? And so her willingness really shone through. And then again, being asked to go to San Francisco. Parvati had approached her at one point before that, saying, maybe you'd like to go to the Atherton Center. So the Atherton Center started in 1980. The San Francisco House and Center was in 1979. And prior to that were the Joy Tours of Swami. In 1978, on the heels of the fire, which was in the early summer of 1976, there was a lot of recovery mode just to get the community. But the other thing that happened, remember, as I mentioned, the Path came out in 1977. And so Swami wanted to ride that wave, even though the fire had its own momentum, wrapping a lot of energy to rebuild a lot of the houses. But Swami felt we need to be expansive in this time when it seems like everything isn't quite fitting together. And so he took a fairly substantial number of people with him. There was a big motorhome. And so he did 2 trips, one from the West Coast over to the East Coast, and the other one in the fall. That was in the spring of 78. The other one was going from the East Coast back to the West Coast. And I arrived in 1978, and I knew nothing about any of these Joy Tours, but a lot of people came from these Joy Tours. And Parvati mentions it had a great impact, where there were people like me that hadn't heard about the tours and came anyways, because I'd read The Path. And I don't know if you've ever seen the original hardcover edition of The Path. Do you have some around? Here? You probably have one. What really touched me before reading the book, when I opened The Path, and there's a photograph often called the frontispiece, right here. And that's where, in the autobiography, Master's photo from the Palace Hotel is there. There's a picture of Swami in his kurta and his dhoti. And it's black and white. And he's pranaming. And he has long hair. And he's pranaming. Before I read the book, when I saw that photograph, I knew my own personal connection was clear with Swami Kriyananda. But Parvati had already lived that experience up, because remember, she came in 1972. So when The Path came out, there's this wonderful photo in here of them blessing the manuscript that was going to be sent off to be printed. Or did they print it? No, they printed, I'm not sure if they printed there at Ananda, but they were blessing, doing an arti. Arti is doing an arti. Arti is one of the nuns, was one of the nuns. But just the energy that they would take, she describes this, and I remember this, is that the typesetter typed in symbols. She didn't see the words. It's sort of like in the early years of word processing, like WordStar. You didn't see things like quotation marks. You just saw symbols. Word processing radically changed within about a year because it was so awkward. Back then, the typesetter didn't see what she was typing. And then they took it to San Francisco, to this place that deciphered the typesetting into a book form, the spacing and all that. So they would drive to San Francisco several times a month, I think sometimes once a week, to do this process. Get up real early, come back late the same day. So Parvati was always a part of a lot of those kind of experiences. And what she recounts in the book is really the nitty-gritty of living the spiritual life. you know. But Parvati also conveys, which is an interesting thing, the wonder and the romance in a positive way. I was talking last night about how I really got into the romance of meditation, but not necessarily in a good way. Parvati's romance, being Parvati, remember she's the consort of Lord Shiva, not me, but Lord Shiva, that she has this strength and will that she is able to move the mountain that Shiva and Parvati live on, you know, in the mythology. But when she went to San Francisco, it was a radical change for her. She had done some teaching, but her roles were more in the background of bookkeeping, the print shop. She actually helped run a business with B'nai of making these little jewelry things. They were little pieces of pine that they drilled a hole in, put wildflowers, and then put a resin on top of it, and they sold this as jewelry. It was one of the organic, like maybe that's not the right term, but one of the original businesses that people could get money from. But Parvati also, in those early years, did a number of things. And one was that she started Master's Market. And this is in the spring of 1973. And because there was no food for purchase at Ananda Village. So what people were doing, and Asha at that time was in charge of the kitchen at the meditation retreat. So Expanding Light didn't come to existence for a long time after that. So people would hassle Asha to buy, you know, fruits and things like that from her, and she just couldn't deal with it because she had to deal with cooking this whole for the retreat. And so Parvati had this idea, well, we can just start small. And so if you know Master's Market, and some of you don't, but if you go in the store and to the right far-hand corner, there's a little office. That was how big Master's Market was when she started, just that. So she said, well, I can buy a few boxes of fruit, different types of fruit, bananas and oranges and things, and some nuts and things like that, and just so that people have a chance. And she only opened it during lunchtime when people are around that area. Because the farmhouse, which we call now Master's Market, had the offices for like Jyotish and Seva. Jyotish was general manager, Seva was basically, the CFO of Ananda Village. And there were other things downstairs, including the print press was in that building originally. Because that was it in terms of buildings for Ananda. The only other building that was around that was in a house was the entrance now that we have for Ananda Village. When you come off of Tylerfoot Road, to the left was another farmhouse. And it was used for a variety of things as well. And that one we did let the fire department, I don't know if you burnt it down, but we let the fire department actually use it as a trial burning experience for the recruits. It was an easier way than to break it down and take care of it. But so Parvati did this just because Swami had said at numerous satsangs, because remember, this was early when there wasn't a lot, except a lot of mud or dust, depending on the season that was going on. He would say, if you see something that needs to happen, do it. And so she took it literally as, I'm going to do something about this. And then she said within a few months, the magnetism drew this young fellow named Sanjaya, and he wasn't there for very long. But he actually was energetic, young, wanted help in the market, and he had $500 that he wanted to give to the market. And Parvati said it changed the market completely. It took over most of the downstairs space, the main floor space, and they got a lot more inventory. They put up shelves, but you can see. And then what they started to do was just pretty much take over the whole building. And the front porch was where all the produce was. And so it was sort of exposed. So they got all this heavy plastic when it got cold and just draped it down, created basically a dead air space so it wouldn't freeze all the time. So everything was real funky at that time. And Parvati said at one point, so I didn't really think about the financial part of it. I just thought, let's do this. She didn't worry about where the money was coming. but it grew. So the time when I first came there in 1978, it was full-fledged happening. I mean, it was really, really happening. And I was always surprised when I first learned that Parvati actually started that. I mean, it was just, let's do it, kind of thing. And Swami, she said this interesting thing about Swami about this, that, because Swami had moved down from being in his dome at the meditation retreat, to his new dome at Ayodhya. And so he was around more, and he actually would come into the office where Jyotish and Seva were upstairs in the farmhouse building. And sometimes he'd come into the market, But Parvati said this very interesting thing. He never commented on asking, how's it going, or maybe you could do this. He never did that at all. Parvati said that he came in and you could sense he was feeling the energy. And he never really offered her any suggestions along the way. And she really received that, not only for herself, but as a real deep principle for being with others, is that encouragement that comes from letting people figure out things, but then giving them 100% support spiritually in that way. So she said that was very significant for her in that way. So when the fire happened in 1973, so she started it, I think in March of that year, and then she received her name Parvati just about a month later in April of 1973. And it was an interesting situation because Swami, again, was more around. Physically, he'd come into the market and stuff, as I said. But there was this, what we call the breezeway behind the market, and there was another building that was used for drying vegetables and drying fruit and all of that. And he happened to see her, and he said, I'm going to give you the name Parvati. That was it. There was no ceremony. There was nobody there. It was just, I'm going to give you the name Parvati. And and I think he said, it suits you well. And that was it. There was no, anything like that. And so she really took that in, and then she did join the nuns around that same time. So a lot happened for her that way. And that continued on. And then when the fire happened, she was actually coming back from down the road, Tylerfoot Road, where Mother Truckers is now. Mother Truckers didn't exist at that point, but it was a drop-off point for some of the produce trucks to leave stuff. And so Parvati would go there to pick up stuff. When she was out there, she saw this smoke rapidly approaching. So she rushed back to Ananda Village, which is just a few miles away from there, and said, ring the bell, there's a fire happening. And nobody could see it from the village quite yet, because it was coming up, Rajasi Ridge at the top of, from Hansa Temple and all that. It was coming up rapidly in that direction. And so they realized almost right away, this fire was out of control. And so she, got a truck, got people's belongings, as much as they could, went over to Ayodhya, because they weren't sure what the fire would do. Went over to Ayodhya where the nuns were and pulled people's stuff, pulled sleeping bags so at least people could sleep in something that night. And then they all gathered around Master's Market. And the fire came up, so it started burning on the 80-foot pine trees. So there's no way you could control that. But the one fatality that happened, which is sad, but one of the pilots with the bombers of the fire retardant, he had a heart attack and died and crashed the plane. But no one was injured at Ananda, but all of the homes but one were destroyed. But it didn't destroy the publications building, which we now refer to as the Hansa Temple. The publications building survived, downtown Ananda survived, Ayodhya survived, Swami's residence survived. So there was enough. And Swami was in Hawaii riding the path. And he intuitively felt, something's going on. And he phoned. There were only 2 phones at Ananda Village. I think one was in the farmhouse and one was a payphone. downtown Ananda. And he phoned the payphone, and somebody answered it. And so he immediately came back to be with the community. And if you've ever seen the book, I saw it somewhere, maybe it wasn't here, a place called Ananda, which has a new title and a new cover. I think it's called Go On Alone now. But the cover is flames. And there's a picture of Asha on the back, a little cameo photo of her holding stuff with everything devastated around her, everything burned down. So that was the feeling. Parvati said she walked to the market that morning, and, the beautiful trees and, things growing, and everything was ashes at the end of the day. It was about 2:30 when the fire hit. Again, burned all the homes. So there were a lot of trailers and vans and teepees that sprouted up one more time in the village at that time. But because of that factor of the fire, that there was a need to bring income into the community. So there are several endeavors that happened. Bharat, who I think most of you know, who wrote the Sharing Nature books, he grew up in Chico, north of Ananda. And he knew some friends that had the rice milling procedures, because rice grows abundantly in that area. And so Parvati and Kirtani and a few others went up there, and they worked on different jobs in the milling of rice process. And it was really hard work. And she and Kirtani shared a room, like I think it was in a motel. And they worked different 12-hour shifts. So they never saw each other. But she said after a month, that's it, I've done my bit. And then there's also an endeavor with men and some women going to plant trees in Southern Oregon, but it was, again, very hard. But it brought more money in than the rice milling people did. But so Parvati just said, okay, I'm going to hand over the market. I think she handed over to Vasudeva and someone else. But she said, I'm willing to do this, whatever needs to happen. So again, that's her spirit, that's her energy in that way. And then when she came back, the market was going well with others running it. And so she let that happen and went on to a number of things. And she also was always one of the people that chanted a lot. So at events and things, Parvati would chant. And it was just, she actually put together, and I still have it, sheets of chantings, She actually wrote a few chants. One based on a Ramakrishna quote, and the other one with a quote from Sister Gyanamata. Because there was that time where people were just trying to figure out what the heck are we doing. But she was just telling me the other week about that. She said, that was fine for that time. But as we grew in attunement to Swami and what Ananda was, those weren't the things to really focus on anymore. It was Master and Swami's chants. So it was really interesting to hear her say that after all these years, what that process for her was. Because I know I learned those chants when I first came, and they had an experience to them, but she said, no, that was that time and not now. But then, after the Joy Tour, Swami really felt to do something in San Francisco, and he brought with him a whole bunch of people. And they lived in a 3-bedroom house. I think there were like a dozen people living in a 3-bedroom house in the Sunset area where Golden Gate Park is, in that area out there in San Francisco. And Swami lived in a motorhome that was plugged in with electric cord running from the house out to his motorhome. And he gave a lot of programs. It's in 1979, it's when he introduced superconscious living as a concept of trying to reach out to people that weren't necessarily ready for the spiritual context that he had been focusing on and continues for us focusing on. He wanted to test the ground to see if this could really work. So he did this program at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's quite an amazing place. There's pictures of Master being there in the early years. But I think there were like 250 people that came to these programs, and then Swami continued to do these programs, including at Ananda Village. He did a week-long program. But again, suddenly things were changing. Things were really opening up. It was really from the Joy Tours in 1978 that it was clear Swami's vision was not that it was a community only. It was touching people where they could be. And from the beginning, he had that in the vision of having the meditation retreat open to people. It was always, how do we touch people? Not how do we find our own thing. And so when that happened with the Joy Tours, it really changed a whole lot of things. Swami really, wanted to see things happen. And when I came in 1978, that's when we had a meeting during Spiritual Renewal Week about starting more meditation groups. And so I started one, and many others started meditation groups. And then as Swami was doing the superconscious living, there was even a more expanded experience of touching people. And just a lot of creative ideas to do that. And Swami, went to Europe to see what could happen there. He was invited by Finhorn to do programs there, and then that dominoed into another bunch of things throughout Europe. So it was the first time that he really explored Italy and started to see what was possible there. So you can just see this whole thing changing in energy. So in 1980, Swami asked Parvati and a couple other people that are no longer with Ananda to go to Australia with them. That was really far-reaching. Swami had been to Australia when he first went to India, and he went to New Zealand as well in 1959. And so there's a photo that's fairly common of Swami giving Kriya in Australia from 1959. He's dressed in white robes. So you can look for it. I think it's out in one of the books. It's not in this book, I don't think. But so you can see Parvati going on this Australia trip. So she was kind of his personal secretary in that mode already. And you can see her honesty about it, her humility about it. It's like, oh, I'm not sure I can keep up with this kind of energy. If you've been around Swami Kriyananda in the past, you know what that's like. It's energy at full tilt boogie, almost all the time. And so for her, it was a real awakening on, wow. And she obviously tried to soak in as much of that wow energy in a practical way and make it happen. And I think that's why Swami asked her to go to San Francisco finally, because he saw in her that capacity to deal with it, even though it wasn't there at that time. He trusted that would evolve for her. And he did that with many of us. I mean, the fact that I'd only been at the village for 2 years before he said, and I was living at the meditation retreat. Again, none of the structures had indoor bathrooms. It wasn't even a seated outhouse that we had for that house. It was a squatter. So you're talking about, don't damage your knees while, but we had running water. It just wasn't any hot running water. And it was kerosene lamps or, propane lights, but no electricity. And I know when I was on staff at the meditation retreat in 1982, we had arranged with the Bell telephone company to put a payphone in up at the meditation retreat. So I built this poured a cement pad for it. I mean, we really did a real thing, but I built it real strong so that if it ever got hit, the vehicle would be damaged, not the phone booth. And then they reneged. They wouldn't give us the payphone. So it was a real scene, because remember, that was our guest facility. How did people get in touch with us was a real miracle. And if they got lost, Om Tat Sat, because obviously there wasn't anything called mobile or cell phones at that time. There was barely phones at that time. And so I built this thing, and then they reneged on it. It ended up being the outhouse that they used down by the dairy in the village. So I'm proud to say I made one of the most soundest structures as an outhouse. So. But anyways, so with Parvati, that she and I had this interesting dance of finally coming together. But just as we were coming together and really focused in our relationship, in January of 1985, Swami asked her to go to Italy, to Lake Como. Remember, Assisi didn't exist at that time. It happened just a couple years later. But in northern Italy, in Lake Como, there was a woman that donated her summer villa, uninsulated. So in the mornings in the wintertime, the water everywhere was frozen. You know, it was that cold. But here it was. We just started our relationship. And we went to talk to Swami just to get his approval of us even having a relationship. And then Parvati asked him about, so moving to Italy? And he said, it's up to you, but I think it's a good thing. She said, I need to go, to me. She said, I need to do this. So then I asked Swami, could I go? And it was just a time when the two centers, the San Francisco Center and the Athens Center, I'd moved down to the Athens Center to help things out there. But I was going back and forth a lot. And so Swami's response was very interesting. He just said, it's better that you stay to help support what's going on in these two centers. So I was like, really? And remember, phones were bad enough in this country. They really barely existed as a system in Italy. You know, both Italy and India bypassed their problems with the phones with cell phones. It's the only reason why they got to communicate. They just bypassed this mess that was never working. But in the postal system, so I wrote a letter to Parvati 10 days before she left. So she got it 2 days after she got there. So that was fun. And so, you know, we had this long distance letter writing program in place. And then every once in a while we'd phone, and that was never really workable. And then what happened was that they needed another teacher, at least one more teacher. So Ram said, well, let's invite Bent, that was my name, to come over as well. And so I was primed to go over. Then on July 4th of that year, 1985, I was at the Afton House. We were doing our July 4th celebrations. And I had this strong intuitive feeling I needed to move back to San Francisco to help the center there. It was just in an awkward phase. And I phoned Swami. And it was interesting. He said, I'm so glad you offered it, because I was going to ask, but I didn't want to, because I know your plan was to go to Italy. So I had to phone Parvati and say I couldn't come. But being Parvati as who she really is, she said, that's the right thing. So it was another 4 or 5 months before I got to go over. And then when we went over, we were organizing the Assisi part of this trip that went to the Holy Land. And there were about 50, 60 people in this pilgrimage. It was a big one. And then they came to Assisi and overwhelmed the facilities. Because we didn't live in Assisi at that time. We didn't have a center there. So all these rental facilities and things we organized for people dealing with their luggage. But at the end of it, Swami said, for both of us, we should go back to the village. And we went back, and we ended up directing the Sangha office back in 1986. It was called the Ananda Spiritual Family Office, but that's what Ananda Sangha means as well, spiritual family. And so we were doing a lot of traveling, a lot of coordination of things, trying to get it off the ground. And then we had asked Swami about him performing our wedding. And he said, of course I'll do that. Because in the fall of 1985, of course, he was married, and he wrote the wedding ceremony for Ananda. And there'd only been a couple of weddings performed since that time. So we were one of the ones lined up to do it. And then in July of 1986, at a satsang, big satsang in the dome, Swami's dome, he said, Bent, Parvati, Krishnadas, and Uma, there were a couple at that time, I need to talk to you. I'm going to send you to Seattle, if it's okay with you, to really do a full blast teaching center in Seattle. Because all at that point we had Sacramento and Atherton. And Atherton was growing into what we know as Palo Alto. But Seattle was like the other side of the moon at that point relative to what Ananda was doing. There was the Lake Como Center that was evolving into a CC. And so we recognize that both in this continent, Seattle was really out of arm's length. It wasn't really connected. So it was a big move for us to do that. And people like Mangala, if you know who she is, she was the president of a sort of earlier incarnation of Ananda in Seattle. And so we had a good group of people. And Navritti was there, a lot of the stalwarts that are still part of Ananda. And so we were going to get married astrologically in November. So Parvati and I talked and said, well, no, we need to get married before we leave on this journey. So Swami agreed. And what was happening was that, Haridas and Roma, who some of you don't know, but they just moved back from India to Ananda Village, they got married on the Sunday, the 9th, no, the 10th, and then we got married the next Saturday on the 16th. And there were hundreds of Ananda people at both those weddings within 6 days. And so we did our wedding rehearsal together, the four of us. And it took about 10 minutes. Swami just said, are you fine with the ceremony? And I was about to say, could we add? And he just looked at me and said, why? And it wasn't like an intention to alter my thought. He just said, why? And I immediately picked up on why. I said, no, it's fine. But it's those episodes with Swami that you had to be there and pick up what was really behind what was going on, because it was just a chance. Not that if you didn't catch it, it was a problem. It's just that those little pauses, and Swami was offering them without commandeering, oh, you need to, why are you? Not at all. It's just like, why? So we were married. We went off to Santa Barbara for a brief honeymoon. We came back. Spiritual Nuke was happening. Within a week after that, we were moving to Seattle. So the Seattle group bought us a futon bed as their wedding present to us. So that helped a whole lot. But again, it made us dive into a lot of teaching. We had to really, from scratch, pick it up, get the finances happening, teach a lot of classes, to reach out to people. We did all sorts of things, as you all continue to do. And it was a great journey. And then after a year of that, it felt right for us to leave Krishnadas and Uma, and then Puru and Lakshmi moved up. So it was another phase, and that's when they got an ashram house for the first time as we were shifting. Because there were things that we felt we needed to do back at the village. And so, again, we were always experimenting with asking what has to happen here. And either Swami or Tradition Devi or someone would guide us. But we were in that mode a lot of our lives until we moved back from here in 2004 to Ananda Village. That we probably, we started Seattle. We were here for 7.5 years. We started Ananda in Texas together. We were over in Assisi. Parvati was in Lake Como. And we've traveled a whole lot. There was a time when circumstance of the village didn't have a lot of job opportunities. So Padma, of Padma and Riemann, was in charge of Crystal Clarity at one point. And there was a small little motorhome, basically a Toyota truck with a tiny little motorhome. And so she asked us, could we head off to the East Coast, pick up the motorhome from a couple of other people in Boston, and then tour around the other part of New England that they hadn't covered. And amazingly, this motorhome had a mobile phone. It was this huge, clunky thing. And it cost a fortune to use it. So Padma said, only use it in emergencies. So we couldn't call the bookstores frequently because that would just run up the tab of the phone usage. And so we did that, and then we had to drive it all the way back. And we were going to stop in Salt Lake City to do some programs with Davy and some other teachers. And the truck had a flat tire. It had a double rear wheels on both sides, and one of the inner wheels was flat. So we were stuck this is a Friday, in Lincoln, Nebraska, because we had to wait through the weekend. And this is football country, and it was a football game day. So the streets were just vacant, because the 100,000 people that lived in the town were in the stadium. So finally we got off and went to Salt Lake City and did some programs and drove it back. And then it was like, well, what do we do for jobs? And so, again, we're just piecing together things, and this would happen or that would happen. But for Parvati and I, we enjoyed that. And she was really not just saying, okay, she was right there, really, let's do this. Let's do it with the right energy. Let's make sure we commit as much as we can to this as anything else we've done with Swami. And it really was her energy that really created the depth of the magnetism behind all these things that we're doing. So if you read the book, you'll see that we barely lived anywhere for any length of time for a while, and which suited me probably more than her. But again, as I just said, her magnetism around it was even stronger than mine to make sure this was going to happen. And so the numbers of people everywhere that we've interacted with, including all of you, is really varied and wide scale. So when we had the 50th anniversary of Ananda in 2019, I said to Parvati, we probably are the ones that know most of the people that are going to come to this event. And so we greeted people that Sunday afternoon. And it really was true that almost everyone that came, we knew. We had experienced in one way or the other. So the joy, that was the reward of all these years. Not thinking that that would be a reward, but that became the reward, the touch from people coming back into it. So anyways, I've gone past the 8 o'clock hour, and I want to give you time for some questions. And we won't answer them because it'll take up too much time. But
I actually don't have a question. I just want a memory.
yeah.
At your guys' wedding afterwards, the reception. That was the best
Yeah,
wedding cake.
I know. Profiterole, which are French and Italian cream puffs, and on a base of a cake. Oh, yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I felt bad that we left that evening because I wanted to eat more of that cake. Did you eat it? Did you have it? Yeah, it was good. It was good. I mean, it was interesting at the wedding because it was like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I think, and it was, August 16th. And the skies were just luminescent as the sunset at the end of the ceremony. I mean, there's, I think, one photo in here, but it doesn't show the light as much. But at one point, as part of the wedding ceremony from Ananda, there is a part where the couple exchanges roses, a red rose and a white rose. And because it was so hot, when it came to that time in the ceremony, Swami said, now take the roses. Where are the roses? So someone had placed the roses in the refrigerator in the Crystal Hermitage kitchen so that they'd be alive by the time that ceremony. And so you hear this click, 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 click on the flagstones around the swimming pool, someone walking to get the roses. And so, just like you were kind of laughing a little bit, everyone was doing that. And I was sitting just a little bit from Swami, and he leaned and he said, meditate. And it was like he caught something that was more than that moment in that situation. I could feel, and maybe it's just my interpretation, I could feel I'm going to take this as a centerpiece of my life, meditate. And it was really sweet that he did, it's just sweet. But anyways, thank you for that memory. Maybe someone could make, no. Year? Oh, it was about 1,000 years ago, I think. 1986.
How did Parvati come to be in charge of Janaka Foundation?
Yeah, that's interesting. So we moved from here, and this congregation graciously, with deepest appreciation from our hearts, gave us a pilgrimage to India as a departing gift. I mean, it was beyond belief for us. We were so touched. But what happened was that the Janaka Foundation had just begun the year before in a very different format and understanding of what it is now. And so the thought was, where do we put Parvati and Pranaba? And when it came up, Parvati said, that would be an interesting experience to really roll with this, the Janaka Foundation. At that point, it was just beginning, as I said, and so the idea of people doing wills wasn't established with Ananda. Estates weren't even in the picture, but she took it on, and she immediately did two things happen. Her mother passed within a month of us moving back to the village. So she had a firsthand experience of what the heck do you do when someone passes. So she had to walk through those steps. So she had immediate training from that experience. And then she went off to a philanthropy training program in Chicago. So she immediately got a sound foundation of moving pieces together. And luckily she found a consultant and a lawyer, not connected with Ananda. A consultant was in the Midwest somewhere that she, this person said this, you do this, and this person, and she connected with this person. And so through many years, she would have phone conversations, him guiding, everything, how to do a newsletter, how to approach people, what's the legal part, you need to get a lawyer. She connected with this lawyer in San Francisco that she still connects with, even though he isn't working with Janaka, just for more general advice. But it has grown. I mean, it has just become the thing that we thought it would be beyond our timeline of our existence for the future. So we developed, the big thing that she did was develop the Ananda Endowment Fund, which means you're not touching, the principal at all. You're investing it. And then with the investment, Janaka gives grants. Like a lot of the Yogananda Fests or those kind of things, they have been funded over the years to make sure that happens. And now funding has gone towards the compassionate care ministry at Ananda and various other things that are appropriate to Ananda's mission. And so there's a board, and Parvati is the executive director of Ananda Foundation, but she works intensely with the board. So it's an amazing, it will be the lifeblood of Ananda going forward so that we're not just contracting, we're expanding whatever happens. So, plus I get to go to the teas that no. Why not? I'll suggest that, yeah. But, so she and I, since she took over Janaka, have had different roles to play. For 17 years, I've been the manager of Ananda Sangha worldwide and work with just a lot of people. There are about 36 people that I connect with under Sangha at the village. And then, for whatever reason, I do other things as well. But I've always kept to the travel part. And again, like this weekend would have been, Parvati comes to some of the things. But because that's not her primary role, I can't ask her to take that time off of Janaka's functioning. But we squeeze it in. So she'll go with me to Los Angeles in August. But I go by myself to Dallas next month. And I go with Nayaswami Sagar to the East Coast in May. and then I'll go to Michigan on my own. So we have a nice balance now that we travel together at times, and that's been good for us. It's been important for us to do that. So, because we've taught a lot together over many decades. So when we do a class, we do not consult with each other what we're going to do. When we do kirtans together, which we don't do that often now, we don't say to one another which chants we're going to do. We're just there. We're just there in the energy. So it's really sweet to have that kind of relationship. The thing that's been interesting is that I've mentioned this a few times, but I had this minor arthroscopic knee surgery 2 years ago. And we've been meditating together in our house, it's very tight. I mean, where I sit, prior to this operation, I sat cross-legged on the floor, and I have about this much space between me and the altar in front of me. And Parvati sits off there where she can put a chair up, but there's not enough room for 2 chairs. And it's a bedroom that's, the bed is the room primarily, besides us meditating there. So after 37 years of meditating together, unless I'm traveling together every day, we don't meditate together right now. It's just an interesting experiment, because we're closer than ever, but we're in different rhythms too. I mean, for whatever reason, I get up too early, and she doesn't. She has adhered to the rhythm we had before my operation, but I get up at 3:30, and she gets up at 5. So I don't want to interfere of being there meditating and making noise and stuff like that. Not that I make noise in meditation. It's just that when the Om comes through, no. But it's interesting because we were talking about this, that the sweetness of our relationship is more profound than ever in that. There's just a real, there's just a deeper blessing than ever for us. And so that's very special for us. So read the book, send in your comments, post on whatever. But just the cover too. A cover of a book, if you've ever written a book, is a real interesting process. Because what is it? So we have a design person over in Italy, Tejendra, that his first few options, no way, no way, that wasn't a vibration. So finally the colors and the photographs. So this isn't them together, they're photoshopped together. But there are several photographs of just Parvati and Swami, but not really suitable for the cover. But just when I saw this, and she saw it, we said, that's the cover for the book. And then the subtitle, as I read at the beginning, really, spiritual adventure and discipleship in the building of Ananda, just so resonated with what the book is. So it really just came together. And Parvati, continues to be impressed by the book itself herself. She just reads it and says, wow, that's actually very good. It's hard, when you're the author of a book to do that. But I think because Prakash helped her so much, he sort of, his resonance, not so much his energy, but his resonance with her is there. And I think she appreciates that in what happened. So anyways, I should let you all go. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranaba, and thank you, Parvati.
Yes. And she did very much want to add her blessings to all of you when I talked to her this afternoon. And she's doing well. She's doing good. She's doing some therapeutic things that she's been given from some of the people at Ananda. So she's actually doing pretty good. So, okay. So come tomorrow.
Yes, we'll see you all in the morning. And I'd like to ask if everybody who'd like to, if we could take a photo.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Bravo.
Prove to Parvati that we actually did the satsang.
We did it. And
That vote to our honors.
let me just take my glasses off.